It's now recording, so you can go.
Thank you, Cecilia. So I want to extend a very warm welcome to Serge Arias, the founder of Costa Rica Birding, who has very kindly agreed to be our speaker today. Sergey is clearly a man of many parts, as you can see from the bio that is up. So he wears many hats as a bird watcher, as a photographer. I know he's engaged in conservation work. There's mention here about the small birding reserve he has started. He's also engaged in research, but he also wears this commercial hat where he sort of blends science and commerce by being a tour operator. He's also a familiar face at events like the British Birdwatching Fair and some of the other overseas bird fairs. And in fact, I had to thank my wife, Nirma, who met Serge at the last British Birdwatching Fair and alerted me that an exciting speaker prospect was staying at the same place we were staying at. And Sergey very kindly agreed to be the LBC AGM speaker. He's also a very good photographer, and the images you see on this slide are his. So I think we are in for a treat, because probably very few people know Costa Rica as well as Serge does. Costa Rica is a destination that just sounds amazing. Everything from volcanoes and cloud forests to beaches. And what an amazing bird list, 935 species, and 5% of the world's biodiversity. So, Sergey, I will hand over to you, and Cecilia, back to you as well, so that you can see that Serge is set up before we hand over to him. Thank you very much.
Are you able to start sharing? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity. It was great meeting you up in last July at the bird fair, and then we were not at the show, we were at the school, and then you start talking to people, and then sometimes you get to know new contacts and important people over breakfast or over a coffee or a cup of tea when you are traveling around. And I will be talking a little bit, an introduction, because we can spend hours talking about every single country, on birding in Costa Rica and some of the key areas, the eco zones, and some of the highlighted birds you can expect. I am currently up in the mountains of Costa Rica in my garden. What you see back is the window overlooking the cloud forest, and it's very distracting because I just saw the first golden wing warbler while Gihan was doing the introduction. I saw the first golden wing warbler coming all the way from North America in my garden for this season. And the bird you see in the first slide is the buffy crown with partridge, which is a Central American endemic. We have a subspecies in Costa Rica, and it's the bird that everyone comes to see in my property. It's a very rare and unique bird, and this is the only place where people see it on a feeding station. This morning, I had a group from Switzerland. They arrived last night into the country. We are starting the birding season for foreigner visitors in the country. So I will be sharing a little bit of the birds of my country and of my garden. Costa Rica is a very small country, so we are across the pond in Central America. And to give you perspective, it's more or less the size, or I think smaller than Wales, to give you perspective. But we are a bridge between the two Americas, North and South. So we get a lot of migratory birds and a lot of birds from North America that is spread to Central and South America, or the opposite with that bridge and corridor. So let's go on the birds. I started birding when I was 6 years old. I was born in the mountains in the south of Costa Rica, up in the mountains. And in the late 80s and the early 90s, a big project came to create the biosphere reserve of the UNESCO that we shared with Panama. the World Heritage Site La Amistad, the Binational Park, and the combination of other parks and preserves. And they came to the village where I was born, up in the mountains, an area with coffee farmers, where ecotourism was a very small thing related to hiking and trekking the summit of the tallest mountain of the country. And the University of Texas and local NGOs took the kids from school bird watching. We used to see quetzals and hummingbirds in our gardens all the time. Those were like the common birds, but they gave us a different perspective on the birds, and they made a coloring book for the kids on some of the featured birds of the area, including the quetzal, owls, hummingbirds, migratory birds, like the swallowtail kite that migrates from South America to Costa Rica. And in that area, you see lots of them. And then I saw the birds from a different perspective. And because of that coloring book, I decided to take a career in ecotourism. I decided to start a company 10 years ago. And now I am related to education and conservation at the University of Costa Rica, where I work as a professor as well. So I wanted to have this introduction because sometimes, and a lot of times, a small action like a walk with the kids, a coloring book, a piece of paper for painting a kingfisher or painting a bird can draw a lot of impact or change the perspective of people on how do we understand nature. And sometimes, and most of the times, the nature we have in our gardens, quetzals are a common thing for us, but are a mega bird and something everybody wants to see on a visit to Costa Rica. And because of education, so we are here now talking about Costa Rica, and because of that coloring book, I have traveled like 15 countries birding and talking about the nature and ecotourism in Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is located in Central America. In that dark map, you see the location of Costa Rica. We call it the waste of the Americas. We have a lot of resident species. We will go over some of them. And also because of the creation of that isthmus, a lot of birds from North America and South America extended the range or established populations in the region or in the middle of the continent, like owls, partridges, swallows, and thrushes. They came from North America to South America through that bridge, and other birds from South America managed to expand their range or establish populations and turn into new species as well in Central America, like the barbets, toucan, the creepers, ambers, manakins, and cotingas, just to mention some of the birds that, thanks to the isthmus of Central America, we have today in Costa Rica and even in North America. And this slide is how the real map of Costa Rica looks like. The green section is the Costa Rica we know in most maps and newspapers and in everything. The mainland Costa Rica, which is around 51,000 square kilometers, like averagely or roughly the size of Wales. But Costa Rica is 9 times bigger than our mainland regarding our sea land. And that happens because we have this little island located 300 miles or 600 kilometers from the Pacific shore, which is the Cocos Island, which is an island not far from the Galapagos archipelago, with a different geological history to mainland Costa Rica that draw a lot of sea land to our country and the maritime limits that we share even with Colombia and Ecuador in the Pacific land. And that is an area that is very unexplored. We will talk a little bit later, but this is how the real map of Costa Rica looks like, including our oceans. So Costa Rica has a network of protected areas that covers 27% of the land into a management category from national parks, wetlands, biological reserves, forest reserves, absolute reserves, protected areas, drawing and gathering conservation from the public offices and the Wildlife Service of Costa Rica. So 27% of the land has a management category in some sort of conservation level. The highest is national park, where conservation is the main reason. We have a network of 30 national parks. We created a couple of national parks in the last couple of years as well. Basically changing the category from a different management area, like a protected area or a biological reserve, to a highest level of conservation. We have also one of the biggest networks of biological corridors and one of the most successful in Latin America. So basically, biological corridors are bridges connecting public with private conservation areas and allowing the birds and the wildlife migrate or move. We have a lot of migratory birds from North and South America, but also we have birds and wildlife that they do altitudinal migrations, like going up from the mountains and the cloud forest to the dry forest, like moving from 12,000 feet, where they spend part of the year, and then a couple of months or 3 or 4 months, they go down to the shore. So basically, biological corridors are trying to protect and to keep that connection. In biological corridors, we can have communities, villages, farms, and a big program of conservation involving people. That why it's so important to keep like living fencing, to keep the small wetlands or the trees or the small islands of forest, or encouraging people to recover their forest areas in like there are like many farms that were abandoned, and the cattle farms are turning into woods again. And the government is encouraging and also paying people to keep the woods to come back on the round. So we are recovering the forest coverage. And regarding that, in the 40s, Costa Rica was the country with the highest record of deforestation in the world. So in those years, in the 40s, we had law that encouraged people to take and develop the land, because that was what we needed. So they were telling our ancestors, you see those mountains, go and grab the land, chop the woods, and that's your plot. All what you can clear is yours. And now, in the last few years, we have become the only country in the world that increased the amount of miles or area of forest coverage in the world. So now we switch from being the evil of the forest to be the country with the highest coverage of woods, increased every year. 54% of the land has a forest coverage category, including those farms that they produce wood to be used, and then they plant again. But a lot of them are private reserves related to ecotourism. In the 70s, we promoted the creation of national parks. That was like the genesis of the conservation and the image and the world image of Costa Rica as a tourist destination. And because of that, a lot of small reserves, a lot of gardens, a lot of ecologists are protecting their forests, because people want to see the birds and nature. So, and in Costa Rica, we are home to 21 important bird areas, according to BirdLife. This was a study done in the last 10 years. So basically, if we put together all the layers of conservation, protected areas, spread farms, and we put over the important bird areas, so virtually we have the whole country involved in a management or a conservation or an important area for our bird life. There are some empties we are working in, like the oceans. Even the local people are not aware that we are a huge country regarding the sea land, but we have a lot of challenges, but I believe we are on the right track. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, we started a project to promote a birding trail in Costa Rica. and the government got interested. And because of that initiative, we started from the Costa Rica Birding Group and the Costa Rica Birding Board I am part of, the government launched a national bird road to promote the country and draw a government agency, our tourism board, into the promotion and into the development of the high quality service for bird watching regarding conservation, and also the services that the international bird watchers demand for visiting our country. So we created also policies to promote and encourage the development of entrepreneurs in bird watching. And this is how, in an easy way, we present our country for people interested in our bird life from a science or an ecotourism perspective. We are home of 935 species, and we keep counting. We are home basically to 10% of the birds of the world. More than 250 are migratory species. Most of them are boreal from the US and Canada. We shared more than 100 regional endemics, mostly with Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras, and other Central American countries, and we are home to only 7 country endemics as we understand the political limits of Costa Rica right now. So in orange, we have the Caribbean lowlands, which is the area with the highest density of species in the country, more than 600 more common birds, but we also have some specialties and regional endemics as well. The foothill in lemon color, the highlands, which is in dark green, basically the backbone of the country, the Talamanque Mountains, where I am located now, and our volcanoes, splitting the country into the Caribbean, the Pacific, and the highlands. So that's why we have so many different ecosystems in such a small area. Also, we have the Northern Pacific lowlands in bright yellow, which is the dry forest of Costa Rica, or the southern limit of the Mesoamerican dry forest of the North American continent. The Central and Southern Pacific lowlands that we shared in terms of birds with endemics with Panama, a little section of Western Panama, and the Pacific slope, which is the connection between the lowlands of the South Pacific and the Talamanca mountains in the highlands. And as a single ecozone, the Cocos Island, that we will talk a little bit I am not sure, so maybe Gihan can let me know if the answers, I mean, if the questions and the comments, we work them at the end, or if I can respond now, because I see a couple of comments in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, Sergey, we're happy to go with what works for you. If it doesn't break the flow and you want to respond to questions in the chat, that's fine. Otherwise, we can take it at the end. Okay, so I think it's better at the end, because I do speak a lot, and you have to let me know when I have to be close to finish. And also, I will leave my contact at the end if you let me, so people can also write direct, and I can respond by email or WhatsApp. So this is how, thank you. So how we understand our country in 7 different ecozones, more than 12 ecosystems. We have 4 dry forests and 4 dry seasons and 4 rainy seasons, sorry, depending on the time you want to come to Costa Rica. So a lot of people say, so when is the best time to go to Costa Rica and not to have some rain? So I'm afraid anytime you come, there is some rain somewhere. So we work the itineraries or the suggestions on where to go based on the month or the times you pick. A lot of people think like the winter, like December to March, is dry in the country, and it's very dry in the Pacific and in a section of the highlands. But in the Caribbean lowlands, it's like December and January are like super rainy months. So it depends on the time you visit. You will have some rain at certain areas of the country. In 2014, when we started or relaunched Costa Rica as a birding destination, we started working with 4 areas of the country, what we call the birding classics. And now we are working in more than 30 areas
of the country from the Costa Rica Birding Hotspots project, and also from the Costa Rica Birding Board, and partnering with our government tourism board. So those are like the key areas, but if you pick one like Carrara in that area, that is like the core site, Carrara, but from there you can explore like 20 different local hotspots when you visit the Carrara National Park area. So just to give you perspective on how the trail or the route works, is very is very flexible. You can pick like one area or combine with other different areas across the country. And even that is a very small country, 2 or 3 weeks is usually not enough. It's a good time to get a good taste of Costa Rica, but it's usually not enough time. And we are one of the few countries in the world with a high revisit of ecotourists, so including bird watching. So every season we receive more than 200,000 bird watchers, people coming with the only purpose of birding, out of the 3 million people visiting Costa Rica for ecotours every year, and at least 750,000 people during their holiday in Costa Rica, they take at least one morning walk to see the quetzal or the macaws or the toucans, or a boat tour to go and see the herons and the egrets in an area of the country. But ecotourism related to bird watching in Costa Rica, from the data we got from 2019, which is the last regular year we have data before the pandemic, bird watching represents more than $800 million a year for this country, and it is related to the amount of hectares and acres and public and private reserves we do have. Also, it's an activity that we didn't invent it 10 years ago when we launched this project. It's one of the first tourist attractions that we started promoting in the early 70s, when Costa Rica started sounding in the US and Europe as a tourist destination. So this is how we sell the country. So basically this map, we add the roads and the national parks and the main attractions and ecologists and everything. And that's one of the 1 million ways we use to promote the country. For me personally, and for the activities we do, a map is the best way to tell people how to move in a place. When I go to a resort or to a small county or another country, to a specific region, the first thing I ask for is for a map. So a printed map. I can go on Google Maps and I can use a lot of technology and apps, but a map, with a map, you can explain everyone where to go, what to do, the altitudes, the ecozones, the distribution of birds, the rivers, the wetlands, and everything. And has been a resource we've been using for the last 10 years and before, to encourage people to visit our country. I mentioned that we are in Central America. This slideshow is not updated, but it gives a perspective of the trends of the number of birds for every Central American country in the last years, because the numbers are moving up and down because of the taxonomy changes and new records and backgrounds. But just to give you perspective, in Central America, we host 1,500 bird species. So basically half of the over 3,000 birds we have in the neotropics, understanding the neotropics from the south of Florida and the south of Texas, all the way down to the Patagonia. Costa Rica is not the country with the biggest numbers of birds in Central America or in the world. Panama has a bigger number, and it's a little bit, and it's smaller than, and it's a bit bigger than Costa Rica. And Colombia is the country with the highest number of birds in the world, which is not far from us as well. Over here, we've close to 2,000 bird species. Panama has an important influence from South America, from the canal. to the right. So they have a lot of the Chocó and a lot of the even Andes specialties. But in Central America, we are home basically to 1,500 species or 15% of the birds of the world. In the region, we have 12 endemic bird areas. And as I mentioned before, we share more than 100 regional endemics. Here are some of the main endemic bird areas. In Costa Rica, we are part of 4 of those. The Central American Caribbean slope, which is all this section in red, which is a location where we have several specialties or unique birds. We have also the Costa Rican Panama Highlands, which is the Talamanca mountains from tectonic formation. The South Central American Pacific slope, that it's also an endemic bird area only for Costa Rica and Panama, and is not here, but also the Cocos Island. It's considered by BirdLife as a single endemic bird area because of the evolution and locations of birds there. We are home to 7 country endemics. On the left, we have the Cabanis ground sparrow that was split in the last 5 years from the Prievot's ground sparrow from Central America. And the Cabanis ground sparrow, it's very interesting because it's a bird that lives in the Central Valley, in the highest dense areas of the country. They live along the streams, along the rivers, in the gardens, in big farms. Like, they have adapted to coffee farms, as most of the natural forest of the Central Valley of Costa Rica, where the highest population is located, have been changed for building or farming in the last 500 years. So this bird is drawing a lot of conservation interest, and also it was designed or assigned as an iconic bird for the local city hall of Paraíso to draw more conservation, because a lot of the farms where they have adapted to live are changing into condos or houses or a different use of the land. So every year we gain a new endemic in the last 5 years, but every year we are reducing the ecosystem for this mega rare bird that lives in the Central Valley of Costa Rica. And the hummingbird on the right, it's the mangrove hummingbird. It's an endemic hummingbird for the mangroves of the Pacific shore of Costa Rica. It's all over the Pacific shores, and it is specialized in the flowers along the mangroves and the insects living in the mangrove area. So we have to go to villages along the shore and small wetlands or rivers to see these birds. And local fishermen are becoming bird watchers, and the local people with houses by the shore are also developing small gardens and coffee shops. They use also garden plants not far from their main mangrove areas. So local people are becoming more interested in the conservation of this bird, because also the mangrove areas are limited, and this bird lives only in the mangroves of the Pacific shore of the country. The other 2 continental birds are the the black-cheeked ant tanager on the left. It's a bird that lives in the Osa Peninsula and in the Golfo Dulce in the South Pacific of Costa Rica. The Osa Peninsula was an island centuries ago, so a lot of the wildlife there, including mammals, are endemic, a lot of trees and plants, and this bird that is only found in that small section of Costa Rica that we travel all the way down to see and visit. And in that area, we host 2.5% of the biodiversity of the world. It's a bird that is giving attention to the non-traditional birding destinations of the country. And the other mainland endemic, to complete the 4 mainland specialties for the Costa Rica, is the copper-headed emerald. This green and metallic hummingbird that lives in the Caribbean slope of the country. We discovered recently a population in the middle elevations of the Talamanca mountains. And also it's a bird that lives in the gardens of many people, in the foothills of the mountains and in many farms where there is a lot of agricultural activities. So the local people, the universities, and the local NGOs are drawing a lot of education to the people to work their gardens with native plants. Like most countries, people want to have a nice and beautiful and colorful garden. However, even that this is a country with a lot of nature and conservation background, most of the garden plants that people have in their backyards or in their front yards are not from Costa Rica. We bring a lot. If you go to a nursery or a store where you can buy flowers and seeds, you find like all flowers from Asia and other areas of the country, because they have flowers all year round, as we have sunshine all the year round. And local NGOs are starting a program with native plants to encourage people to have their gardens or include native plants to protect also the ecosystem for the copper-headed emeralds. And everyone is so excited for having a copper-headed emerald or an endemic hummingbird in their garden. Out of mainland, in the Cocos Island, this little island located 300 miles offshore, we have 3 endemics. The Cocos finch in the pictures, which is the only Darwin finch that is not in the Galapagos Island, and the one that Darwin never met. On the left is the male, and on the right it's a young female. They breed all the year round. They are pretty active, very similar to the ones in the Galapagos, for the ones that have visited the Galapagos archipelago. And if you want to see all of the Darwin finches, you need to make a tour to the Cocos Island as well. The island is also the house of the Cocos tarantulet on the left, that used to be called a couple of years ago the Cocos flycatcher, now the Cocos tarantulet. And
sorry, excuse me, Serge. Just a quick time check as requested by you. So it's 7:30. I don't know how much you've covered of your presentation, but I would aim for like 7:45, although there's a bit of flexibility. And we can aim for about 15 minutes of questions.
Okay.
It'll take to 8, but we are flexible. I mean, we can go on a bit longer. And for everybody listening in, because there are so many people, I would ask people to post their questions to the chat. And then Cecilia, who is chairing this meeting and is the secretary of the London Bird Club, will read out the questions. If there was a small audience, we would have asked people to raise their hands, but I think that's not possible because there are about 3 or 4 screenfuls of people. So I'll hand it back to Sergey, but a reminder, please post your questions on the chat. Thanks. Back to you, Sergey. Okay, so I will try to go quick. The other endemic to the Cocos Island is the Cocos cuckoo, which is a relative to the mangrove cuckoo with a gray cap, pretty vocal and pretty active. It's a long journey to visit there. And of course, there are birds that we share with other Central American countries. We have a subspecies for Costa Rica and Panama of the resplendent quetzal or quetzal that is told to be the most beautiful, or at least one of the most beautiful birds on the world. And ecotourism has been drawing a lot of conservation money. And we have seen an increment in the population because the main food that the quetzal eats, I'm really lucky to have them from December to March in the garden of my house. You plant the wild avocado trees, and in 7 years, they start bringing fruit, and they draw the quetzals to your garden if you are in the range of distribution.
flycatchers, like this royal flycatcher, also draw a lot of interest. And though this bird, it's a bird that we go driving to a lodge, and they nest on a farm over a little pond on a farm. They build like a cest. He's sitting on top of the nest, and the nest is a whole hanging basket. And they also built a second fake nest. And these are birds that we find just driving towards the roads or through a national park. This is a volcano hummingbird, an endemic. We have 3 races. This one has a purple throat, and it's like a very, very tiny. It's just slightly a few millimeters bigger than the bee hummingbird from Cuba. So it's very, very tiny and small. And this is a bird that we find in the gardens of every house up in the mountains and in the national park. It's a bird that specializes into endemic flowers, and for finding them in the woods is very difficult. But if we visit farms, in hotels, dining places with a proper plants and feeding stations, it's easy to find, and you avoid the 5 miles walk in the woods. And a lot of people visit Costa Rica to see raptor. This is spectacled owl. Is one of the common owls of the country, but common doesn't mean it's like it doesn't reduce how important this bird and unique and special can be. And going through the different ecozones in a quick way, the orange area, which is the Caribbean lowlands, and the green area share a lot of specialties, like the popular called the Fruit Loops toucan, or the killbill toucan, or the rainbow-billed toucan. It's a specialty for that area. We are home to 6 species of toucans, and also over there you find the sorry. The colored arasaris, oropendolas are abundant. Raptors, we have the second biggest raptor migration in the world, happening during the fall. In a single day, visiting one of the raptor centers, you can see 500,000 of raptors, and the biggest broadwing hawk migration in the world. It's also home to the great green macaw that was recovered in terms of population in the last 20 years. Is the house of the endemic copper-headed emerald, and a lot of special abundant tanagers, like this crimson color tanager, that visit feeding stations and more. If we move to the highlands, the number of birds is less, about 200 birds compared to the 400 bird species we have in the Caribbean lowlands. But the higher we go in Costa Rica, the more endemic and rare birds we find, like the resplendent quetzal. This is the male with the long undertail coverts. This is the female, and this is the fruit I was talking about, the wild avocado tree that the population is recovered. And the local farms are also using the tree as part of their fencing or as part of the shade of their crop. The highlands, it's a great place for a very rare and particular bird of Central America, which is the three-wattled bellbird. We still need to know a lot about the altitudinal migration of this bird. This bird spends most of the year in the highlands. However, during December to March, they visit the peninsulas and the shore in search for food resources. And there are records in most Central American countries. So we are still finding out a lot. We have discovered and located 4 different populations in Costa Rica with different vocalizations. And the highlands, of course, is also the special place for hummingbirds. Most of the species of hummingbirds are located in a specialist in unique plants. Prongbill barbettes that are related to toucans are also a group that everybody wants to see and spot. We have the prongbill barbet and the redhead barbet, and the northern emerald toucanet is the cloud forest toucan or the toucan of the cold areas of Costa Rica. When we mention the highlands, this means areas that will be located within 7,000 to 12,000 feet above the ocean. It's cold. Everyone think of Costa Rica as a warm country, and it is a very warm country, but when you spend a couple of days in the highlands, you need a fleece because temperature can go under 0 Celsius at night, and in the early mornings when we wake up to go and see the quetzals and the specialties of the cloud forest and the paramos. If we move into the Pacific side of the country, we will find endemics like this Fightyville aracari that we shared with a small section of Panama, subspecies of tanagers like this cherry tanager that used to be a single species, and now it was like brought back to the scarlet drum tanager. This is the female. The orange colored mannequin, also an endemic for that area. And it's a place where we find a lot of species of trogon, like this is lady-tailed trogon and gray-headed chachalacas that remind me a lot of dinosaurs. If we go to the dry forest, where we have like 8 months of dry season in the country, we can find specialties for the dry scrub areas and the wetlands of the dry forest, like the lesser ground cuckoo, a subspecies of yellow warbler called the mangrove warbler, plain chachalacas, a lot of water birds like the roseated spoonbills and these white crowned parrots as well. They are found around in the northern lowlands and in the dry forest. The mangroves are one of the biggest section is located there for our country, and also it's a great place to take a boat or to take a walk through the mangroves for spotting the endemic mangrove hummingbird. American pygmy kingfishers are abundant. White-throated magpie jays, they will come to the dining places and hotels to try to steal your breakfast every morning. And in every fencing, we will find the dry forest specialty turquoise-browed mudmud, which is the national bird for Nicaragua and El Salvador as well. And we have the Cocos Island, this little green island located 300 miles offshore from Costa Rica, where we have the three endemics we mentioned before, the Cocos finch, the Cocos flycatcher, and the Cocos cuckoo. And we have to go on a leave aboard for 10 days. It's a 36-hour trip. It's a national park and a World Heritage by the UNESCO. The national park, Costa Rica, is 5 times 51,000 square kilometers of mainland, and the Cocos Island National Park, including the ocean that is protected, is 55,000 square kilometers. The national park is bigger than our main land, and we just know a little bit about this place. The bird that was in the video was a fairy tern or a white tern that will come towards your head. The Cocos cuckoo, the flycatcher, and the finch are like the main attractions, but we also have a subspecies of yellow warbler with a red cap that we shared with the Galapagos Island. And this is what happened when we are sailing back and forth to Cocos. That was a group of around 15,000, at least, wedge-tailed shearwaters molting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And of course, birding is a big reason to go there, but the main attraction currently is going diving with the biggest schools of hammerheads sharks. That is possible if you have a license. We run tours, we promote the country, and we work in like refreshing the image of Costa Rica as a tourist destination. But besides the ecotours and all the activities related to businesses in ecotourism, from the different hats I have, the university, my company, the Costa Rica Birding Group, and the Birding Board, we want to keep this activity running over the years and also supporting conservation. So we created in 2022 the first good practices manual for the birding in Costa Rica. We have had situations that things have gone beyond, and for example, a couple of quetzals have abandoned the nest because of the people crowding around. So we are learning from those mistakes because of the number of people coming. And we created with the universities a tool to encourage the businesses, the visitors, the people, the tour operators, the guides, and everyone involved to manage in a sustainable way birdwatching. This is a project we run with the tourism board as well. We know a lot about our mainland, but we don't know a lot about our oceans and the Cocos Islands. So we have been from our tours collecting very interesting data and doing and writing science papers on behavior and reports of birds in the ocean and in mainland. So bird tourism also draw a lot of science knowledge, and it's important. We are also starting next year a program of pelagic science-oriented tours. So we want to go and see pelagic birds. We see like sooty shearwaters that nest in New Zealand or in Australia, here in Costa Rica, or Tahiti petrels from July to October. So we want to know why they are here, if they are like expanding, or if it's because of El Nino. So we are going to start this program next year, like taking people on pelagic tours, but on those tours, we will be collecting data to get to understand the presence, the abundance, and the behavior of seabirds in our area. And also next year, we launched the first book of the birds of the Cocos Island, where I am a co-author with Michelle Montoya, who studied the island for 7 years. So birding in Costa Rica, it's so important. Ecotourism in general is hugely important. 4 out of every 10 jobs are related to ecotourism, and birdwatching create more than 2,000 direct jobs and more than 10,000 indirect jobs. Ecotourism represent close to $1.5 billion for this country, and a lot of money goes to conservation. And birding draw at least $100 million a year. When we think of conservation, when we think of keeping the forest alive for the partridge, to protect the Cocos Island, we also have to bring the figures to the table, because of you visiting Costa Rica and taking a plane all that way long to Costa Rica or to Sri Lanka or to Uganda, all those birds and other wildlife are being protected. Why? Because if we don't have the ecotourism in all of those countries, including mine, wildlife will go extinct faster. A lot of people have been talking and saying that taking a plane is bad. But when you take a plane to Costa Rica or Sri Lanka or Uganda or Guatemala or any ecotourism country in the world, the footprint of your flight is 100,000 times paid visiting small ecologies, national parks, reserves, hiring local guides, eating in local dining places, and of course, supporting the local communities. I do protect the patch of this little reserve because people come here to see the partridges, the quail doves, and the tanagers. And we have more than 7,000 small reserves and hotels along this little country that protect a huge amount of hectares because of the people coming to see the nature at their gardens or at their forest patches. So there is my contact information. I will be next year at the Bird Fair, or at the Global Bird Fair, which is the new Bird Fair, in July in Rutland. If you are there, stop by for meeting me, and I'll bring Costa Rican coffee to share. And I am not sure if we got some time for questions and comments.
Yes, we have. Thank you, Serge, for such an interesting talk. I will read out some of the questions from the chat box. So first we have from Rosie: how do you manage the relationships between the public, private, and community-owned land for the biological corridor? Okay,
so every biological corridor, that's a really good question, because you have villages and big farms and people living in between the national parks and reserves, and then we build this corridor. There is a local committee or a small board for every corridor, with the local people, the farmers, and the government agencies. And when we are in a biological corridor or a protected area, the city halls develop regulations and laws that have to be accomplished over the regular ways if you want to build or if you want to change the use of the land for cattle or sheep or for crops. So there is a local committee or board that rules or manage all the conflicts and the relation between the villages and the conservation, because sometimes there are conflicts when people are trying to change the use of the land. So those boards involving the local people and the government reduce the pressure or potential conflicts, because in the past that little board didn't exist and there were a lot of problems and issues. And with the local people managing their own forest areas, we are seeing more positive results in terms of the letting people do their activities and harvesting, but with certain amount of regulations and limitations.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. So Helen asks, how do you best ensure that the tourism feeds back effectively in promoting avian conservation?
A lot. Well, the network of protected areas of Costa Rica, it does depends directly from ecotourism. So all the money that the national parks receive comes from the tourists visiting the places. So for example, I've been to Britain like 7 times, and I've been in some of the RSPB areas, and some of them are free or you have like small fees. In Costa Rica, every time you visit a national park, a foreigner pays like $15 per day for visiting the area. And in places like Cocos Island is $50 a day for just to be allowed to enter into the national park. That draw a lot of money, and a lot of that money goes to conservation. And also a lot of the science in the 60s and 70s run by organizations like the Tropical Science Center on the Organization for Tropical Studies started here in Costa Rica. So we got to know a lot of our wildlife and birds that now we promote as an ecotourism resource because of science. So since the beginning of ecotourism, science has played a very important role in getting to know the birds and the wildlife and their behavior. And many private reserves have their own science program. So every time a scientist wants to study a particular bird or behavior, the private companies and organizations are always open for supporting. So there is a good relation within the business of ecotourism and conservation, because basically ecotourism was born from the science data we had. It was one of the countries with the highest amount of information on the biodiversity in the 70s. So that helped a lot on turning that information into ecotourism.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thank you. Helen also asks, is avian flu a problem at all in Costa Rica?
Yes. Currently, if you are talking about the current situation, I was in Ecuador a few weeks ago in the Galapagos. There is a big problem in the islands along the Pacific coast of the Americas, and also in the Atlantic sections of South America. Some islands of Galapagos were closed. There is also the confirmation in Malpelo, Colombia, and in Cocos Island. We had a tour going to Cocos this month, and we had to move it to March because the avian flu had a big strike in September. Now the rangers are not reporting dead birds, but the ground trails are closed till December to reduce the impact. And we don't have like a lot of, we have sea mammals, but we don't have mammals like sea lions in Cocos. In Ecuador, the flu also moved into mammals. So most of the islands are, we don't have a lot of information in the media, but I knew about the situation and the context because we are always in touch with the authorities that live in the island. Looks like it was not a big thing, and they are not registering like more deaths of birds, but it was confirmed, the avian flu.
So continuing on from that, Johan asks, if someone only had a week and preferred to spend it just at one location or eco lodge, what would be your top 3 or top 5 recommendations?
Ooh,
Maybe top 3.
That's very difficult because anywhere is good, but I would say like, if it's a week, I would spend like 3 nights in the Caribbean lowlands and 3 nights in the highlands, or or a whole week in the Caribbean lowlands, like Sarapiqui area. A week or 3 days up in the mountains of the Quetzals National Park, visiting all the local hotspots, and 3 nights in the Central Pacific, in the Carrara area, because we have the match of the dry forest and the South Pacific lowlands. It's like 2 ecozones and like 4 different ecosystems gathering at the same point, because that is like the limit of a lot of ecozones. If you have like 10 days, I would do like 3 in the Caribbean, 3 in the mountains, and 3 in the Central Pacific. And that would give like 7 to 10 days, like in easy birding, not starting every day at 5, like 300 species of birds. So there are too many facilities and trails and gardens and places where people can enjoy the birds from a boat, from a walk, from an aerial tram through the woods, from towers, from gardens, feeding stations. So I would suggest Sarapiqui, the Quetzals National Park, and the Carrara National Park area.
That would be a great trip. Just going back to research, Gahan also asked if there are significant numbers of science students coming from North America for undergraduate or postgraduate field work.
Yes, during the spring break in the US, June and July, we get a lot of students doing short trips along Costa Rica to learn about biology or wildlife interactions, or to study plants or orchids or birds in general. We have the Tropical Science Center and the and some very famous field stations like La Selva Field Station, where like a lot of people come to visit from abroad, and other private initiatives. The University of Costa Rica, where I work, do a lot of science research, and science-oriented tourism is huge in Costa Rica. And because of science-oriented ecotourism and pure science into wildlife in general, including birds, Costa Rica, I think it's in the top 3 countries with the highest number of science papers on Nature every year.
Wow, that's impressive. Fiona would like to know what the bird is you're holding in the picture on the slide.
It's that was on the sailing to Cocos or back to Cocos Island. The 300 miles takes 36 hours, which is a mega pelagic tour. We go on a fancy boat, which is basically like a big liveaboard with rooms, and you see a lot of seabirds and oceanic birds, and sometimes the wedge rump storm petrels stop on the boat for resting. That was a very weak one, so we fed the bird with some tuna and put it on a little box. So it was like great to see them very close and to see their little tube noses. So that's a wedge Wettrumpt stormpetrel.
Sounds like a great experience. Suzanne, again, thanks you for a lovely talk. She says, it's so wonderful that as a kid you learn to appreciate your national heritage. Are you carrying that tradition to help today's young people appreciate the Costa Rican flora and fauna?
Thank you. Yes, now I am starting to pay back, because people, when I was a child and a young guy, people believe in me. So I decided to work and to move into ecotourism as a profession. So now we have projects at the university where I work. We are starting programs with villages and communities. This Saturday, we have a bird count in the protected area where I live, and we bring kids and people and everyone. And I mean, I have to pay back, and we have to create the next Sergio or Serge in Costa Rica. And education is the key to understand and preserve. And also, with education, we can take advantage in a positive way from the natural resources like this country is doing. Ecotourism represents like close to 15% of the GDP of Costa Rica. And in situations and contexts like the pandemic we just had, we really understand the weight in ecotourism, and we understand why we have to protect and use the nature as a tool to draw money to Costa Rica in tours, enjoying the birds, but also the way to protect nature. So when you can develop a business, and you can, for any business is created for the purpose of making money and to support your family and change your life or whatever purpose you have. But when you can develop a business and create conservation and social development, it's even better. That is real sustainability. That's why I was talking about the planes and people like fly shaming. And if people stop coming to Costa Rica, we are going to lose the nature we have. And because of tourists visiting this country, we are aware of our nature. We study the bird. We want to keep this ecosystem because we want you and the next generations to come and see the bird. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like it's hugely important in Costa Rica. Nama also, who you met in July, thanks you for the talk, and says that you mentioned Costa Rica had a high degree of deforestation in the 1940s, which she was surprised to hear as it's known for its ecotourism today. When did the change in policy or thinking start?
The change came in the 60s when I don't know the proper English expression, is like, you are not a prophet in your own country. We say something like that in Spanish. A lot of foreigners with local people, they came to Costa Rica and they saw the beautiful nature. Ecotourism happened as an accident for Costa Rica, but as a great accident in the 60s and in the 70s, while the rest of the world was following the path of Costa Rica in terms of deforestation. I mean, we were the highest, the country with the highest rate of deforestation. In the 60s and the 70s, people said, we need to protect the mountains, we need to protect this. And that's when we started to hear about ecotourism. And then countries like Belize and Kenya started ecotourism at the same time. And then it was exported to every country in the world. But the science organizations establishing research campuses or facilities in Costa Rica, getting to know the nature, and a lot of foreign people coming to say, stop timbering the wood, create this national park. We can protect and also bring people to enjoy this nature. A lot of people came from abroad and opened the eyes of the local people. And we created a strong network of reserves and parks. We still have a lot of challenges and threats. Sometimes as a Costa Rican, I see a lot of issues going around. You come here for 1 or 2 weeks and you see the beautiful Costa Rica, but we have a lot of challenges and situations that after a month, you start to realize that there are problems related to conservation. But besides of that, conservation became part of our DNA. So in any sort of profession you are involved, at some point you will be part of a conservation initiative that that changed the mind of people. So people coming to tell us that we had to protect, and then seeing people with binoculars changed the mind of people of Costa Rica. And also because of the cultural behavior, foreigners have always been welcome to Costa Rica. And also because of the distribution of the land after the colony, the land went to a lot of families and to a lot of people. Costa Rica is the result of a mix of many cultures. I didn't mention, but the clay-colored thrush is a brown bird. It's our national bird. It's not colorful, but it has a beautiful call, and it resembles that we are the result of a mix of races. And I think in that way, when foreign people came in the 60s and the 70s and said, you need to protect, that was like easy because we were used to foreign people that made this country what it is now. And those people changed the mind of the locals and created very strong programs that turned into ecotourism. Because if we talk about living of pure conservation, that is impossible, because you cannot draw conservation when you have the people hungry. I will timber the woods for harvesting food for my family, but if I keep the woods and if I get people coming to drink coffee in my farm and see the birds I have in my garden and they pay for that, I will keep the forest, and I will be more interested in getting to know how to make the hummingbird more accessible, or how to encourage the hummingbird to reproduce in my property. So I think it's like a mix of many conditions that change the mind, starting with the foreigners coming to tell us, you need to protect this. This is like green gold.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Well, thank you so much, Serge, for coming and talking to us. We've all really enjoyed it. I mean, if you have a look at the chat, you'll see lots of people thanking you and saying how wonderful all your pictures are.
There is my contact information, and
Mhm.
also I will be in Broadland from July 12th to the 14th in 2024. If you want to come and say hi in person and have a cup of coffee or tea with me in our booth.
Yes, definitely. I hope.
Or maybe
some
plan
people
a trip to Costa Rica. Why not?
Yeah, well, I think this has been a great advert for Costa Rican wildlife, and perhaps some people on this talk will be able to take a trip there soon. Thank you everyone for joining our talk and our AGM. We hope to see you at another one very soon. We have our other section, AGM talks, in the coming weeks, and now it's just left for me to I will finish, I'll end the recording there.